Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the July 3rd meeting of the Ann Arbor City Council. If you're able, please rise and join us for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would the clerk please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Kalasapathy?
Here.
Councilmember Frenzel?
Here.
Councilmember Westfall?
Here.
Councilmember Lum?
Here.
Councilmember Grand?
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Here.
Mayor Taylor?
Here.
Councilmember Eaton?
Here.
Councilmember Crapel?
Here.
Councilmember Warpahowski?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Present.
We have a quorum.
May I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda, moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion of the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is approved. Are there communications today from our city administrator?
Yes, Mayor. I've attached a memorandum addressing the activities of the Medical Marijuana Ordinance Review Committee. The committee will be forwarding its recommendation for the new ordinance to council for consideration at the next meeting on July 17th. The memo will also recommend that the committee continue to provide advice to both the Planning Commission and the City Council as we continue to implement new state statutes. Item AC2 is an end of June update on public services work on school safety improvements. Traffic engineering and public works staff continue to address priority locations that the Ann Arbor Public School System Transportation Safety Committee has identified. Item AC3 are the responses to the agenda questions. I'd also at this point like to publicly acknowledge John Mirsky, who has agreed to voluntarily serve as an advisor for sustainability. He's an accomplished engineer and he serves on the Energy and Environmental Committees, and he is going to help city staff advance and emphasize our community's climate action and environmental values. And then I'd like to forward a message from city staff, and that we wish all of our fellow Ann Arborites a happy Independence Day celebration, and look forward to seeing them at the parade tomorrow. I also want to recognize one of our own, Staff Sergeant Derek Reeves, who wrote to us from his deployment to the Middle East, expressing his appreciation of city staff providing him a box of goodies from home. While he's not serving at the national level, Derek is part of the crew at the water treatment plant, which recently received national recognition for the quality and taste of A2H2O. Along the lines of safety, I'd also like to note that our safety and communication staffs have released new posters as part of the Be Safe campaign, which you can see on the front of the dais. And they have a message that'll be available for viewing both on CTN and our social media sites.
Thank you. There are no introductions today, so we move directly into public comment general time. Pardon me, public comment reserve time. Public comment reserve time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. Speakers are not permitted to delegate their time to others. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we would be delighted to provide it to you. Our first speaker today is Caleb Poirier.
If you want to know who the real wonks, the folks who take the politics of Ann Arbor seriously, I'm going to guess that this is the litmus test of being here between the weekend and on the eve of July 4th. I had a party going on in my world yesterday. I spent my time parked in a car at the periphery attempting to wrap my head around both the county's millage and DC3. I continued into today, pinging friends left and right to get their 2 cents on this millage and Ann Arbor's portion of it, which might come if it is passed. Let me say that it is like a fine bologna. I don't mean that in a negative sense. Sometimes bills pass because they have a lot of different things in them. This is a challenging bill for me to support, but I will support it and encourage my friends to support it because it has a long-term source of affordable housing in it. Affordable housing, as you guys might guess, is good for the mental health of people who are not housed, and they tend to generate less police calls and less emergencies of all kinds when they make it into housing. So that said, I support it. Here are my reservations, and my apologies because some of them have to do with the county, but I think it's appropriate that they be voiced here. It was my original understanding that this millage would be for, and I heard a succinctly put phrase here, if I can pull it up from my sideways scribbled notes, that the money is for mental health, emergency, crisis prevention, and mitigation. And I'm excited to see the money potentially go towards that through CIT training for the police as well as mental health crisis training. The CIT is a 5-day course and the mental health training is a 2-day course. None of that, however, is stipulated in the money coming from the county millage. And so because of that, we may not necessarily see an increase in the skills of our police forces across the county. So that is a concern for me. Finally, the reason I feel a great deal of angst about this is the 5 different issues that are mixed together. It's not that I dislike any one of them, it's my fear that the voter will see bathwater in one of the issues and decide to throw out baby and bathwater. Good luck on this one. I will support it going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kathy Griswold.
Good evening. I'd also like to speak about DC3. I not only have reservations about it, but I'm somewhat sickened by the dirty politics that are at play, and it's tainting pedestrian safety. Our staff, in spite of some of council's actions, has made significant improvements in pedestrian safety in the last year. So now we have a way for council to vote for pedestrian safety without spending any money. This is amazing. You can be on the record as supporting pedestrian safety and not spend any of your money. So you've got it for train station consultants, climate change consultants that simply duplicates what's already being done. And I speak from a position of knowing about climate change because my daughter works for the Center for Sustainable Energy in California. So we've had family discussions about it. And Ann Arbor needs to join other organizations and work cooperatively rather than waste funding that is desperately needed for streetlights in school zones, streetlights that could be solar powered. Okay, my real reservations for DC3, in addition to the dirty politics, is process. I think we're totally ahead of the county on this issue. The county has not even agreed upon language yet. It's bad governance. We are trying to support issues in the middle of a political campaign 5 weeks from today, and I'm just dumbfounded that this is coming forward right now. And I just talked to the county clerk. I ran into him, and he was dumbfounded by why we would be looking at this resolution tonight. And lastly, as I touched on before, we need to have a meaningful, comprehensive review of pedestrian safety. And we cannot let pedestrian safety and affordable housing be empty phrases that we simply add to everything that we want to pass, because that's not how it works. If we're serious about pedestrian safety, let's trim some of the vegetation that's as high as school crosswalk signs at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker today is Ann Bannister.
Hello, I'm Ann Bannister, and I'm from 612 North Main Street, Ann Arbor, Michigan, 48104. I urge City Council to vote no on DC 3, the Washtenaw County millage to support Community Mental Health Department, County Sheriff's Operations, and Policing Jurisdictions rebate. I support seeking a new millage to fund mental health services, and I believe the voters would also. If the voters would also likely support the policing section if it were on a separate ballot issue. The state has reduced mental health funding significantly. Mental health issues are related to so many community problems, such as substance abuse, homelessness, joblessness, and crime. And addressing these causes with mental health issues makes the problems easier to resolve. The problem is with including law enforcement and with the city diverting those funds to other issues, namely pedestrian safety, affordable housing, and climate change, which undercuts the Board of Commissioners' efforts to address the mental health problem. I hope that the Board of Commissioners will reconfigure this millage proposed to address mental health issues and put the policing section into a separate ballot issue so that the voters can have clarity on their support of mental health services and policing separately. I do not support city government stating that they will use the tax revenue for purposes other than what was stated in the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Silkworth.
Hello, my name is David Silkworth, and I'm running in the Democratic primary for the Ward 5 City Council seat. I agree that pedestrian safety, affordable housing, and Ann Arbor's climate action plan are all very important community needs that have not been funded to levels commensurate with our community's expectations. Our city staff and city council just recently completed a long budget process where our city council members discussed a long list of priorities. Unfortunately, some council members did not prioritize pedestrian safety, affordable housing, or our climate action plan highly enough to ensure that they would receive adequate funding during the normal budgetary process. We need to have city council members with the right set of priorities who will be responsible in how they approach important issues like this. I do value these community needs more highly than some others, and I think that the additional funding that is being proposed tonight for pedestrian safety, affordable housing, and for Ann Arbor's climate action plan could have been achieved during the normal budgetary process. A more responsible source of recurring funding for these needs could have been achieved by lowering the DDA TIF capture from the currently agreed level of $6.2 million to $4.7 million, which would have brought the DDA TIF capture closer to their historic funding norms and which would have provided the same level of funding being proposed tonight at a time when it was appropriate to find a recurring funding source for these important city needs. More recently reported good news for residents is that several of our current parking garages will be paid off within the next few years. So if our city council members act responsibly, then they should be able to reduce the DDA TIF capture even further, which would allow someone with the right priorities to start using some of that additional funding for other highly important budgetary items like a more comprehensive road repair program, making our bike lanes safer, or updating and adding street lighting that's so desperately needed in many of our neighborhoods. We need city council members with the right set of priorities so that we can actually focus our attention on returning in services what residents are paying in taxes during the normal budgetary process. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Are there communications from council? Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. This evening, and we'll be voting on it at our next meeting, is a resolution to appoint Stephanie Stoffer to the Greenbelt Advisory Commission. Dr. Stoffer lives just outside of the city limits, so there will need to be 7 votes to put her on the Greenbelt Commission. She has the ringing endorsement of the Executive Committee of the Greenbelt Commission, so I hope that we will put her on the commission at our next meeting. Dr. Stoffer has extensive experience in the local food movement. She is a farmer and a farmer mentor, so I think she has a great deal to bring to the commission, and hope that you will appoint her in a couple weeks. Thanks.
Councilmember Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wanted to highlight one of my favorite citywide events, which happens to be in Ward 2. This coming Sunday is the 37th Annual Huron River Day. It is a family-friendly event that takes place from noon to 4. That's this coming Sunday, July 9th. There are bands. There are $5 canoe and kayak rentals, and lots of food for sale and activities for all. Secondly, I have the honor of highlighting a game code for those of you playing the summer game this summer. We've got our code this week, which is wait just a minutes. Those are the words wait just a minutes with an S. And earn those points. Feel free to enter that game code into your game center, but please do refrain from tweeting it out or sharing it on social media. Wait just a minutes. Thank you.
Councilmember Frenzel.
I just wanted to remind the public that the Planning Commission, it will be reviewing the Lower Town development proposal on Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. here in Council Quarters. Additionally, and separately, I worked with Miss Stephanie Stoffer on a number of projects, and she has my ringing endorsement also.
Further discussion? I would like to request confirmation of the following appointments that were placed on the June 19, 2017 agenda. To the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority, Kyra Sims. To the Historic District Commission, Anna Epperson. To the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board, Anna Foster. To the Parks Advisory Commission, Robert Gallardi. May I have a motion, please? Moved by Councilmember Grand, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? They're approved. We now have before us the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please, to approve the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Warpachowski, seconded by Councilmember Crapel. Discussion of the consent agenda. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to pull out CA 12, please.
CA 12. Where shall we put that? Let's pop that into DS1. Councilmember Westfall.
I'd like to pull out CA5, please.
CA5 to DS2. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The consent agenda is approved unanimously with 11 council members present, thus satisfying the 8-vote requirement with respect to CA 6, CA 7, and that is all. We now come to a series of public hearings. Public hearings are opportunities for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters specific to the agenda. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak. Speakers need not have signed up in advance. Please pay close attention to the time clock. Speakers may, like I said, need not have signed up in advance. They may merely come up to speak at the matter of the public hearing. However, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. We have now public hearing number 1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 55, zoning, rezoning of .17 acres from TWP Township District to R1C, Single Family Dwelling District, Carlberg Property, 2501 Victoria Avenue. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 2, an ordinance to amend sections 8501 and 8511 and to repeal sections 8522 and 8524 of Chapter 105, Housing Code of Title 8 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 3, an ordinance to amend sections 342, 343, 344, 345, 346, 347, 348, and 350 of Chapter 41, Cemeteries of Title 3 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 4, resolution to approve 904 South Main Site Plan, 904 South Main Street. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 5, a resolution to approve the Dubuque annexation, 0.59 acres, north side of Devonshire Road, east of Heather Way. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 6, resolution to approve the Braun Park annexation, 10.44 acres, west side of Chalmers Drive, south of Huron River Drive. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no one, this public hearing is closed. We have before us the work and special session minutes of June 12 and the regular session minutes of June 9, 2017. May I have a motion, pardon me, June 19th, 2017. May we have a motion, please, to approve the minutes? Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion of the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes are approved. B1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 55, zoning, rezoning of 0.14, let's try this again. Rezoning of 0.17 acre from TWP Township District to R1C, Single Family Dwelling District, Carlberg property, 2501 Victoria Avenue. Moved by Councilmember Grand, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion, please, of B1. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. B2, an ordinance to amend sections 8501 and 8511 and to repeal sections 8522 and 8524 of Chapter 105 Housing Code of Title 8 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Frenzel. Discussion, please, of B2. Councilmember Love.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. And as I noted at the first reading, I do appreciate all the good work and significant progress in rebuilding the building department, the building service area. And I also appreciate and encouraged by the renewed and increased focus on customer service in the unit. And the one change here that's particularly significant is that we're now providing a real incentive to landlords for clean first inspections. If a first inspection is clean with no issues, then an extra year is granted before the next inspection. And I think that's proper incentive and a win-win for everyone. So thank you.
Further discussion of B2? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. B3, an ordinance to amend sections 342, 343, 344, 345, 346, 347, 348, and 350 of Title 41, Cemeteries of Title 3 of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Lum. Discussion, please, of B3. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. C1, an ordinance to amend Section 55 zoning, rezoning of 20 city-initiated annexed properties from TWP Township District to R1C, R1D, Single Family Dwelling District, and M1, Limited Industrial District. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Warpachowski. Discussion, please, of C1. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? C1 is approved. C2, an ordinance to amend sections 263 and 269 of Chapter 29, that is to amend water and stormwater rates of Title II of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor. Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion, please, of C2. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DC2, resolution to support increasing the penalties for speeding in school zones. Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Warpachowski. Discussion, please, of DC2. Councilmember Westfall. I'm sorry, Warpachowski. I thought you were appointed in Westfall.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. This resolution comes through, to some degree, through the work of the Council Policy Committee, but in large part through the good work of our City Administrator, Howard Lazarus. As City Administrator Lazarus was looking at the enforcement of speeding in school zones, he noticed that it does not keep up with the same penalty levels of speeding construction zones, even though, if anything, the risk factor in school zones is higher than construction zones. Kids aren't usually wearing the bright yellow, day-glow, AFSCME safety gear that you see in a construction site. The proposed resolution has been vetted by the City Schools Safety Committee, and is an attempt to try to help us on one of those E's. When we talk about the different E's, enforcement, education, engineering, encouragement, evaluation, helping have strong and reasonable penalties for the violation, especially at the higher ends, the flagrant violation of safe speeds in school zones, helps us have one more arrow in the quiver as we try to keep kids in the whole community safe.
Further to Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as a member of the Policy Agenda Committee, as you know, I'm a co-sponsor along with Councilmember Warpachowski. In the last couple of our policy agenda meetings, we've discussed working at the state level through GCSI, our local representatives, to raise the penalties for speeding violations in school zones. And rather than just have the administrator start to do that, we felt that it was a policy question that council should have the opportunity to decide and weigh in on before proceeding. So that's why this item is before you tonight. And what the resolution does is to request council's endorsement and support of raising the fines for speeding in school zones and for the administrators working at the state level to make that happen. We've looked at a couple alternative scenarios for raising the fines and decided on what is included here tonight, which is to double the fines for speeding in school zones up to 20 miles per hour over, and to triple them for violations more than 20 miles per hour over the limit. The Ann Arbor Public Schools Transportation Safety Committee reviewed this at their meeting last Monday. I attended that meeting along with Mr. Lazarus, and Councilmember Eaton is our representative, of course, on that committee, and we discussed it, had a fairly robust discussion at that meeting, and they support the resolution. While increasing the penalties for speeding in school zones alone obviously won't solve our challenges, it is one of the many tools that, taken collectively, will ultimately improve pedestrian safety at schools. So I'm hopeful you'll all agree and will support this tonight so we can give the administrator clear direction that pedestrian safety at schools, and he obviously recognizes this is a key priority for us, and that we support this specific initiative. Thanks.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eaton.
Thank you. I'm the council representative on the School Transportation Safety Committee, and we did discuss this to some extent at that committee meeting, and they do support this. They encourage us to go forward with this, and I think that they'll be stepping in to express support for it as well. But I also want to note that the committee expressed a lot of support for the idea of increasing enforcement around schools, because after the initiation of a school zone around the Huron High School, we had rather aggressive enforcement for a while, and it actually had an impact. There's greater compliance with the speed limit around Huron High School, and so they encourage us to go that direction as well as this. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Westfall.
I just want to thank the policy committee for working on this. I think any way we can get more local control over tools like this is a good thing. And I'm encouraged that hopefully we'll have this capability at some point as well. A couple of things I questioned staff about in my caucus questions had to do with, what else are we asking for? And what else would we hope to implement before getting to this level of enforcement? I look around, I see a lot of four-lane roads around town that may or may not warrant being 4 lanes. I also was encouraged that there may be some movement on the state level to give more local control over setting speed limits throughout the city on non-state roads. So I just hope we're not asking for too little. I'd prefer to have more control over some of these regulations than less, and I hope that we're seriously considering design speed of roads, because when the road is a virtual 4-lane highway going through town and you drop the speed limit from 40, in half or something, and have severe penalties associated with speeding, I fear we may not be going in a logical order in terms of really creating a culture change around, speeding and infrastructure change. So, it sort of brings back the discussion about the pedestrian crossing ordinance, where it's a positive thing, it's a good thing, but there arguably were several steps perhaps we should have gone through with regard to ordinances before we got to that. So I'm hopeful that we'll have a more thorough conversation with the Transportation Commission and other interested entities to see how we can get our hands around speeding in general. Thanks.
Further discussion? For my part, of course, I'm delighted to support this as well. I just want to, as a matter of, from at least my perspective with respect to the process of things, I don't have any objection to staff or others communicating with, state legislators when they have the opportunity to do so, or indeed when queried by our representative, our lobbyists in Lansing, as to where city direction is going, what city priorities are. I think it's useful for us to speak with clarity and specificity when we have the time to do so. But things move fast in the legislature, and it's not always possible for us to have a process such as this. And so I wouldn't want to see this viewed as having a chilling effect on communicating city initiatives and city directions and city policies to our representatives, either elected or otherwise. Further discussion of DC2? Councilmember Lum.
Sorry, just a postscript if I may. I did speak to our lobbyist. Oh, sorry. Mr. Profit and Mr. Owens working on this as well about this. And the Senate Majority Leader is poised, I think, to assist with this, but I learned that it was very important to them to know that the schools had an opportunity to weigh in on this, and actually said they would have felt kind of foolish had this not been reviewed by the schools. And they also want to understand that the city, before they go off and advocate for things, that we are basically, speaking with one voice, and we've had the community conversation. So that's why I think, and I appreciate how this is being advanced. And to Mr. Westfall, these other issues about, speeding elsewhere in the city and what can be done, I welcome the transportation committees engaging in that, and then also, perhaps also, making recommendations to the policy committee or just directly to council, so we can all also provide information to further refine any recommendations so that they reflect the concerns that we're aware of in our parts of town. So thanks, and thank you.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DC3, resolution of intent regarding potential Washtenaw County millage to support community mental health department, county sheriff operations, and policing jurisdictions rebate. Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion, please, of DC3. Councilmember Ackerman.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think one of the greatest examples of a community's values take the form of the local government's budget. And as we discuss adding to that budget through a new 1 mil millage at the county level, we need to assess what those values are. Inherent in this millage is, of course, public safety and mental health. At the local level, we honor that commitment to those values. 45% of our general fund budget goes to police, fire, and our courts, our safety services. When it comes to the safety of pedestrians, this past budget cycle saw $2.8 million of pedestrian safety infrastructure built into that budget from various funds, as well as another about $500,000 added through council amendments. These are very real commitments to these things that are uniquely expressed, and the county is recognizing that and giving a rebate back to local communities to honor that financial stake. Depending on how the county moves to calculate that rebate, either through taxable value or by population of those communities that have their own police forces, we'll be seeing between $2.3 and $2.5 million returned to the city of Ann Arbor. And so it becomes a question of how do we as a community decide to spend those dollars. To me, I think it's clear that we have very underfunded priorities, those being affordable housing at a time when our city is becoming increasingly less inclusive and diverse, climate action, when we have a president of this country who denies science and denies the very real effects that local communities see on the day-to-day, from stormwater to heat islands. And finally, to pedestrian safety, which has for a long time been incorporated into our streets planning, but not funded at the level that I think our community expects when it comes to the safety of our children. This gives us the flexibility to use those $2.3 to $2.5 million to further those goals and priorities that I believe are reflective of this community. But I don't think it would be fair to not point out how these promote public safety in particular. While we have a tremendous police force that makes our residents feel at the level of 97% of them that they're safe in their neighborhoods, there are issues around getting to school and getting to work when you're biking and walking. When you're talking about mental health, we outsource that work at the city's level to the county and to our nonprofit partners. But what we don't necessarily outsource is housing for those individuals who need that care. How do we provide a platform through which our county partners can provide their mental health service in a way that's safe and secure and gets people from the streets into stable housing and provides a continuum of care to get them back into the workforce and back into providing and being a productive member of our community. But I also point to Miller Manor as a prime example of when you take what was a rundown public housing project and you put in the intentional rehabilitation from a capital perspective, but also programming through social workers and mental health professionals, you see the number of calls for service to our police department decrease. And so there is a very defined marriage between supporting those with less and protecting everyone. So I'll leave it at that. I want to again reemphasize that this is a millage that will be finally crafted by the county's commission, but will go to the voters, and the voters will ultimately decide to tax themselves at a rate of 1 mil. This is simply stating of the taxes the city receives, or rather of the rebate that the city receives, how we think best to implement it.
Further discussion in the queue. I want to step in here as well. I want to give a little bit of more color, too, as to the origin of the resolution and its place in the firmament of what the county is up to. The reason, I think, well, it's been observed that the resolution is not as specific, doesn't specify with detail what the monies would be used for in connection with pedestrian safety, or in connection with climate action, or in connection with affordable housing. And that is with intentionality, because we are not yet clear exactly what the county millage will afford us. The goal of this resolution, as it was stated in the course of the whereases, is to assist the boards and commission. The board and commission is in the process of deciding whether or not to put a millage on the ballot, the nature of the millage that it wishes to put on the ballot. And part of that millage is, I think, quite reasonably, when it talks about a millage to support the sheriff's department, a rebate to the policing jurisdictions, the jurisdictions that already use their own general fund monies and other monies to support police services within their boundaries, so as to avoid double counting. With this proposal before the county, there are some questions on the county side, whether or not there should be county strings attached to the rebate monies. This is an issue that could very reasonably come up at the county. You know, I got in communications with the chair of the County Board of Commissioners, Commissioner Labar, and asked him, broadly speaking, would it be useful to that conversation to give the county board some sense as to how we in the city, at least at this juncture, prior to the final passage of the resolution, at this juncture, how would we think that we would intend to use rebate monies if indeed they came our way? Commissioner Labar makes it, at least to me, and I'm certain to others, very clear that he would not wish to dictate to local jurisdictions that received a rebate how they would use these monies, and would find a statement from policing jurisdictions how they would use rebate monies to be useful in the course of that conversation at the board table, which will occur if the current schedule holds, which will occur next week. It is therefore, I believe, entirely proper and prudent for the city to make what is essentially a two-step process, if indeed it passes at the county. That two-step process would be tonight articulating the broad goals that we would have for a county rebate if indeed it came our way. And then in the event that the county millage was indeed put on the ballot by the Board of Commissioners, we would have time to give our full articulation to the public how we would intend to use those monies prior to the vote of the people in November 17, just as we would in the event that we were putting our own millage on the ballot. I think that we need to, in this case, be responsive and nimble when we are confronted. Confronted is strong a word. When we are in the presence of a proposal at the county over which we have no scheduling authority. County is moving forward with this notion. They are moving, which is very clear, a certain portion for the sheriff, a certain portion for the community mental health, and a certain portion of rebate to the policing jurisdictions. That will be very clear to the voting public. It'll be very clear to the county. And I think it's incumbent upon us to give the board and commission a notion of the direction that we would take if they gave us that authority. And then in the event that they choose to do so, then we would go forward with the voters with a more plain articulation, a more detailed articulation of how those funds would be spent. That's the genesis of this resolution. That's the genesis of the timing of this resolution. And I think that it makes a good deal of sense, and I encourage my colleagues to support it. It speaks, I guess now let me pivot a little bit to the substance of it, the 20-40 split. It will come as no surprise to anyone that we at the city in Ann Arbor are under material budget pressure, and that we have priorities which residents continually request that we support, and that we as a council, I believe, truly indeed wish to support, but that we cannot do so because of budget exigencies. In this case, the county is, again, if the schedule holds, putting forward a proposal that would net us a substantial amount of money, and I believe it is useful for us to use those funds to address the long-standing structural problems that we have not heretofore been able to, that we have not previously been able to address, given the funds that we have in the ordinary course. And so I think that the 20-40-40 split is appropriate. I think that the division between pedestrian safety and affordable housing and climate action is appropriate. And I very much look forward to having that conversation. Further discussion. Councilmember Eden.
Thank you. Consistent with the advice that we received from the city attorney's office this afternoon at 3:35, I move that we postpone DC3 until our July 17th, 2017 meeting.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Lum. Discussion of the postponement. Councilmember Eden.
It's privileged advice. I'm not sure that I can go very deep into it, other than to say that significant legal questions were posed that we can't get an answer to until we know what the county proposal is actually going to look like in its final form. And I think that it would be inappropriate for us to go through with this just on speculation as to what it might look like. And so I think that we should follow the advice of our attorneys and postpone this till July 17th.
For my part, I'm going to be voting against the postponement. I view this resolution does not commit the city to do anything. It is an expression of intent by its terms, and I don't think that we are that the city is at any risk at all by moving forward and expressing to the public and the commission, the board and commission, pardon me, and the Board of Commissioners, how, at least at this juncture, based upon the facts that we have, how we would intend, how we anticipate moving forward. If there were, I wouldn't mind including some reference at some point to, subject to legal review qualifier here, but I believe that is inherent in all of our actions. For those reasons, because it is, I don't think, putting the city at risk, and because I think the resolution by its terms is one of communication to the board, to the county board, rather than one of definitive binding action, I'm going to vote against the postponement. Councilor Long.
Thanks. Well, I support the postponement, and I agree that, the city attorney's office has recommended this be postponed, and I certainly, think that makes sense, and we should take the city attorney's advice. A number of us have asked some, very relevant and pertinent questions that cannot be answered given all the unknowns. And I also think it's just very, very premature to declare the intent on how Ann Arbor would spend a significant amount of money, and ridiculously premature to specify the amounts. Those are decisions that come from the budget process. And given that the county commissioners have not yet even voted to put this on the ballot, we don't know if it will happen, what the structure is, what the final details are. I think we need to let the county commissioner do their work and respect the process. And those are, I think, important considerations for postponing this tonight.
Further discussion of the postponement? Councilmember Warpahowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I'll be voting again no on the postponement. The resolved clauses, of the resolution have two elements. First of all, regarding the overall county process, it's to support their efforts to secure additional funds. I think we know enough now, certainly when you look at what's happening at the state and federal levels, especially on our mental health side, it is a mess. Unless the county is able to shore up that side of their ship, our county mental health system is going to be facing a world of hurt. They need to shore up those funds, and that element of the resolution, that resolved clause, I think we clearly have the basis to support with the information we know now. The second element is, as Mayor Taylor indicated, a support of a two-step process. It says that we intend to consider a general fund rebate use policy. We're, as Mayor Taylor said, we're beginning the first step of a two-step process. We're saying, in broad strokes, we see this 20-40-40 approach, and then, subject to whatever happens at the County Board of Commissioner level, we'll know the details to make adjustments there. But this resolution, I believe, gives the County Board of Commissioners the necessary support to move forward as they consider this element. As they do that, some of the elements that we're dealing with, I think it's also to stake out the city's position in here. Part of the County Board of Commissioners, as they've been trying to wrestle with these various issues of mental health, public safety, how do they make that work? My position has been, and I've been very clear to the County Board of Commissioners and others, that I recognize that the city of Ann Arbor has a responsibility to pay for the county public safety services that we use, right? When we arrest somebody and they're held over for a longer period of time, they go not just to the city holding facility, but they go to the county jail. We share these facilities. We have a duty to contribute our fair share to those resources, and that fair share, those county resources that we use is under significant financial stress. That said, I don't see any city obligation that we should contribute to keeping the cost of sheriff road patrol services low in Scioto Township or Ann Arbor Township or the city of Dexter or the other communities that are contracting for sheriff services. So this sense that we are supporting the overall scope of this that says for communities like Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti and Pittsfield Township that have their existing public safety services, that they get that rebate, they get that passed back to them so that we're not subsidizing those road patrol contracting jurisdictions. I think that approach is fundamentally sound. And I also think it's appropriate that those funds that come back get passed back to those jurisdictions be unrestricted funds, so that the communities that have made their commitments, figured out what their proper allocation to public safety, in terms of policing, in terms of fire, in terms, I would argue that affordable housing is a public safety issue, because sleeping under a bridge is not safe. I would argue that climate change and climate sustainability is a public safety issue, because the destruction we're seeing to our environmental systems and to climate is a threat to all of us. At many levels, so that is a public safety. And how we balance these is best handled jurisdiction by jurisdiction, not by fiat from the county. So the overall approach that the county is putting forward of the 25% rebate to communities with their own policing jurisdictions, I think is fair and is appropriate, and we should get ourselves on record today supporting that approach of a rebate, supporting that approach of getting the money that the county needs for their core countywide public safety services, their mental health services, and begin this two-step process of tonight specifying in broad strokes how we would use that 80-20-20, excuse me, that 40-40-20 split, and then should the millage pass, should the vote pass through the County Board of Commissioners, then to be able to present the voters with some higher level of specificity in terms of what our specific intent is with those funds, should they come our way.
Further discussion of the postponement? Councilmember Frenzel.
For my part, I believe it is important for us to send a signal to the county commissioners to let them know our intent behind and getting behind their movement on this in a few different ways. One, I'm leery that our citizens might think that we're asking for a double dip on policing, and if we don't make an overt statement about where that money is going to go and that we're going to provide additional resources, additional projects, fund additional priorities in this process, I'm concerned about how that vote moves forward. I think it's really important for us all to recognize also that during budget season, all of the initiatives that we're talking about in the 2040 were overtly stated as priorities for this body. We have numerous studies that we've asked to have completed on our behalf that prioritize the work within each of these three sections: the Climate Action Plan, the Housing Affordability and Equity Study, and the Vision Zero, to mention a few. We struggled. I worked with at least half of council and dozens of people on staff to try to find funding over the budget season for each of these measures. And of course, we do have some funding, but for example, the Climate Action Partnership came to us early in the budget season and requested a minimum of $1 million a year to do substantive work on climate action work. I think we need to get ahead of this conversation, and that's important at this juncture.
Further discussion on the postponement? Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Crapo.
Councilmember Crapo?
No.
Councilmember Warpahowski?
No.
Councilmember Smith?
No.
Councilmember Cosapathy?
Yes.
Councilmember Frenzel?
Nope.
Councilmember Westfall?
No.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
No.
Councilmember Ackerman?
No.
Mayor Taylor?
No.
Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Motion fails.
Councilmember Eaton, you still have the floor? On the postponement.
That didn't
Fair
pass,
enough.
so, yeah.
Councilmember Frenzel.
I think I just said my bit.
Councilmember Grant.
Oh, I think Councilmember Lum was in the queue, so I'll.
Councilmember
No, go
Lum.
ahead, you had your hand up first.
Thank you. I want to thank all the members of the public who have reached out to us and apologize for those that I could not personally get back to. The support that we have received via communication from the public has been pretty astounding in number and also just in the support for all of these priorities. And I think that that's really reflective of our priority setting process, that we as a council have actually listened to members of the community and learned what their top priorities are. And if I think it's fairly consistent that it's affordable housing and pedestrian safety and climate change. When I think about what requests I get from members of the public, why aren't we doing more? You need to find funding for. It's for these three issues. So it seems fairly consistent and not particularly surprising that if we were to receive a rebate, that we would be communicating these priorities to the county. And I appreciate the work of all of the sponsors of this initiative and look forward to supporting it.
Councilman Lum.
Thank you. Needless to say, I, and I suspect many others, were surprised to see this on the agenda tonight. I don't know the motivation and can only speculate, but I will not do that. What I will do, though, is give you a litany of concerns I have about the resolution and why, in my view, it is a textbook example of ready, fire, aim. The city attorney's office has recommended this be postponed, as has been noted, and again, I certainly agree that that makes sense. It is very premature to be even considering this resolution. The county commissioners have not acted on the millage, confirmed there will be one, or finalized the structure and details. That may or may not happen in the next couple of weeks, but out of respect for the county commissioners, their roles and their processes, we shouldn't be taking any kind of action until they're allowed to do their work. Second, it is very, very premature to declare intent on the specific areas where Ann Arbor would spend a significant amount of money, and ridiculously premature to specify the amounts in each category. The city has a robust annual budgeting process we've used for years. It's a process that works with several detailed, lengthy work sessions with individual departments. It's a process that specifically is designed to provide the necessary background for council to make informed, educated decisions on spending. To say now, with a weekend to think about it, here are the three priorities for $2.5 million in spending, and here are the specific amounts, ignores that process. In my view, that's irresponsible. The city has many underfunded needs beyond the three identified here. There's fixing roads, improving some roads and intersections like the Nixon Corridor, replacing aging water and sewer infrastructure, stormwater mitigation, public safety, including traffic enforcement at schools and in neighborhoods, an unfunded pension liability, human service funding needs, the Allen Creek Urban Trail, and uncertainties in solid waste and recycling going forward, to name just a few. To call out three at this point is just not appropriate or proper process, in my opinion. I'm also very concerned about having a county millage vote for mental health services and public safety, where the city uses the proceeds for altogether different purposes. Along with another council member, I asked a number of questions about that this morning, whether it's even legal, whether it constitutes a violation of Headley, or is a Headley override, what the ballot language would say in Ann Arbor, and who would prepare the language and get it approved, and what the city would do to ensure residents were properly and fully educated about the millage vote. Quite understandably, the city attorney's office was unable to provide answers to all the questions in such a short time frame. And as I mentioned, they have recommended postponement of this item to at least after the county has acted. These are important questions, however, that do need to be answered before council considers this. Just think of all the efforts we went through a year ago to make absolutely sure the ballot language for the street, bridge, and sidewalk millage accurately reflected how the money would be spent. That was completely appropriate. When you ask folks for more money and to approve higher taxes, there is a fundamental obligation to be crystal clear with voters. With what's contemplated here, having a millage that's called one thing, but in substance is something altogether different, meeting that standard will be quite difficult, if not impossible. Whether it's legal or not, the whole thing is very confusing, and that's not acceptable for a tax millage. Plus, a resolution of intent from council on how money will be spent isn't binding, nor does it guarantee anything gets into the budget or stays there over time. Any future council could change it with another resolution. We're not amending or approving a city budget. the only way to make a formal commitment on a tax millage is to clearly state how the proceeds will be used in the ballot language and reflect that in an ordinance. I also believe the county should consider separating the millages. That's their decision, obviously, but it seems to me that would simplify things and offer voters clear, distinct choices on what they support and value. Always a good thing in my view. The other aspect of this that's troubling to me is the almost cavalier tone about raising the tax burden on the already very heavily taxed residents of Ann Arbor. While the first resolve clause doesn't actually endorse the county millage, it essentially says, we're with you on this. It says to the county, if you think you need more money, we, the city council, encourage you to seek it. It's bothersome to me that we're quick to recognize the quote-unquote community aspirations of residents when it comes to spending more of their money and raising taxes, but silent on community aspirations when it comes to the pleadings we receive from residents to not increase their taxes anymore because it's driving them out of their homes. And one last note, it was called out that these were overtly stated as priorities during the budget discussions. Just to call out a couple things here that you'd like to spend this money on. To suggest in the pedestrian safety section that money would be used for quote-unquote enforcement augmentation, I just find that interesting, because council has had the opportunity to do that in the budget. I mean, actually, 6 years running, I brought forward budget amendments to do that, but council decided not to do it and to hire a chief of staff instead. Council also had the opportunity to add more money for pedestrian safety at the schools with another budget amendment, but rejected that as well. So we haven't exactly walked the talk when we've approved our budgets and had these opportunities to, and these weren't, because it's also been mentioned how much we spend on public safety. As you know, I always find offsets, so I'm not adding expenditures to the budget. So it's all a matter of just making these things that we value priority. So thank you for listening. For all the reasons, I will not be supporting this resolution tonight. Thanks.
Councilmember Kalasapathy.
Thank you. Yeah, couple of issues. I mean, Councilmember Lum reiterated the importance of process, the whole budgeting process. And picking three, I mean, these are noble causes. I mean, who's going to argue against affordable housing or action against climate change? But I think at this level, we need to be looking at details. I mean, when staff are unable to respond to a single question, I mean, there is an issue. It's almost like, in my field, they might say it's like writing a blank check. I mean, the vendor is great. He's not going to cheat you. Just sign the blank check would be something like that. And it bothers residents when the details are lacking and staff are unable to. I mean, this is very similar to the whole train station issue. I mean, we are not allowed to see any correspondence that's going on between staff, what level it's in, but yet we are asked to vote again and again on issues where we don't have any details based on, of course, public transit is great. I mean, I think we need to, instead of using these phrases of affordable housing, climate change, because these are kind of the trigger words, I think asking details is good. We need to know details, and the residents need to know details. And as Councilmember Lum said, I mean, we need to take these millages very seriously. I was talking to a local ethnic grocery store owner. I went to buy groceries. I was talking to them. And they were saying how difficult it has been, the tax burden on them. And last week when I was speaking, the tax bill wasn't out yet. And she said, I'm just so afraid my home is not going to become affordable to me anymore. And kind of I said, oh, a couple of council members are thinking about putting an affordable housing millage on the ballot. And she gave me this look like, do you guys really understand what this is all about? I mean, it's not just funding the lowest of our residents who can't afford, but it's also people, middle-class people, who have been sharing this tax burden. So, I mean, at many levels, I mean, just considering this like rebate sounds some or other, it's this free money coming. I mean, it's actually additional taxes being put on our residents. So I find it really problematic when I go through staff answers and every single one has been said, it cannot be responded because it's too premature. They don't have the language of the ballot. They don't have the details. And yet, to say, oh, but this is just intent, but words do matter. Words do matter because we promise something and we don't do it. It's like the Greenbelt millage. So many people have told me recently that we promised that 1/3 would be spent within the city and 2/3, I mean, rule of thumb. And that's what we promoted. People have said, we remember reading it. We voted based on that. Yet, so words do matter. It could be intent. So we can't just say, oh, this is just rough intentions. No, I mean, how do we come about with this 40, 40, 20? It's not that these intents are bad. No, they're great, noble intents, but we need to go beyond that because I don't think any of us here is going to say work against climate, global warming is what we should be doing, but it needs to be a broader debate and a process, and when we don't have any details, just agree on a number, it just seems very hollow to me. So that's where I stand. Thank you.
Councilmember Westfall.
Thank you. To me, this, at its core, is a resolution of intent. And similar to this body's intent and success in assigning funds to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund with the sale of the air rights over the library lot, it has the same effect as this money potentially being rebated to us, hitting the general fund, and then going out into to support different policy areas. The fact that we are giving some direction as to our priorities, which have been reinforced to us over the years, among others, to be fair, I think it's appropriate to say what our intentions are. You know, I hear the same complaints about taxes overall, and you know, that hopefully will be a separate discussion. There's ways of addressing that, but I find the priorities expressed in this resolution of intent to be consistent with what we have heard we should support but have not been able to. Part of the concern about traffic enforcement at schools, I think this could be used for that. Just overall safety looks like it can be used for capital and operating. So all of this will be vetted in a budgeting process as far as I'm concerned, and how the specifics are worked out will come. This is merely a resolution of intent and assigning money to policy areas we have been not able to fund thus far.
Councilmember Smith.
That last comment that Councilmember Westfall made is very important, and why I signed on as a co-sponsor is that these three areas that we're talking about are areas that are consistently underfunded or not funded at all. Having the ability to make a statement of intent is important because words do matter. It is important that we respond to the public that asks us, why aren't we doing these things? You know, there's only so much, so many times you can say, well, we don't have money. I mean, stuff costs money to do. We can't somehow magically make these things happen without the staff to do them, or people to help us enact these things. We can't simply reduce away the DDA because that's going to have other budgetary impacts that mean that money's not going to be available to do these things. We actually have to find money to do them. And think that this is a very straightforward statement of intent, and I think it's important for us to get this out there because I think as the largest municipality in Washtenaw County, we have the ability to help set some direction for some of our neighbors to see how seriously we take these issues and our role in fulfilling the housing equity goals and objectives that we have, that what we are actively doing to deal with climate change and what we are doing to improve our pedestrian and bicycle environment for our citizens. So I think it's important that we get out there in front. I'm glad we have a relationship with the County Board of Commissioners to be able to be talking about this and that there's dialogue back and forth. And I am very pleased to support this evening.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you. I just want to speak quickly to the process moving forward. Each May, we as a council adopt our budget for the coming fiscal year. That gives us 10 months to have conversations around what the body and the substance of that will be. While we have accepted a very complex skeleton of a budget for the coming fiscal year, we will still have that same process. So tonight, we support the idea of a rebate in the millage, which means that the county would honor our support of public safety at the local level. Second, the county would then draft and pass millage language to add it to the ballot. Third, we would then come back, reassess that language, and then act appropriately. Fourth, the people would vote on that millage with a rebate or not. Fifth, we would meet in December to discuss our priorities as a council, which, based on the last few years' worth of conversations, are going to probably look very much like this 40-20 split. Then, over the course of those next 5 months, we'll have a series of very robust and long work sessions in which the city administrator will present a draft budget. Our actions tonight and subsequent after the county passes its language will inform the city administrator's draft budget presented to us at the beginning of next year. We are not passing a budget for the next 10 years tonight. We're simply stating our intent that a rebate is a good idea to local municipalities that have their own police forces. And we can then come back and act appropriately once we know the county's final decision. But again, this is not the culmination or the decision that will impact any budget, but simply an expression to the county that we support a rebate, and this is an idea of how we could spend it. And subsequent action would be indication to the city administrator how we would like to prioritize these new monies should they come.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eaton.
So I want to emphasize that I'm an enthusiastic supporter of funding county mental health services. I will work to pass a reasonable millage for mental health services. It's the core of all of many of our local problems, including substance abuse, homelessness, joblessness, and crime even. I'm less enthusiastic about the law enforcement portion of the proposal as it currently exists. I'm afraid that passing this resolution may actually have an impact on the ability to pass the millage when it comes up for a vote. Some people might be more likely to vote for this millage because it will be seen as a source of funding for these objects. Others may be less likely. I don't think that we can really foresee what impact that will have. But expressing our intent in advance like this, I think raises some potential legal problems. If you remember when our president expressed his intent about immigrants, it later caused him considerable problems in the courts when he did write his directives about cracking down on immigration. And we may be, in fact, creating similar problems by expressing our intent of how we're going to use this money without first getting legal advice on how we should handle this. This is poor budget process. I support funding pedestrian safety, affordable housing, and climate action, but as this is stated here, these are just vague promises. There isn't any particularities. What do we really mean by affordable housing in this resolution? We're talking about a hypothetical millage, a vague list of intended goals, and we're operating with a complete lack of legal advice. While I both support the mental health aspect of the millage and these three goals within our own budget, I don't believe that this expression of intent serves any positive effect. It just is not something other than a vague statement of cause. About 12 questions were asked in our agenda questions today about this item. The response we got was, the proposed millage will not be final until it is acted upon by the County Commission at its meeting on July 12, 2017, or possibly at a later meeting. The Commission's final action may include amendments to what was proposed to and approved by the Ways and Means Committee. Answers to the various questions posed regarding item DC3 could only be hypothetical at this point. I'm going to skip a point here because I don't think it's germane. And it concludes with the advice, it would be better to wait to answer those questions until the actual language is finalized and approved by the county. We're not listening to our staff, we're not listening to our lawyers, and I think that we may in fact regret that. So I will not be supporting this resolution.
Councilmember Crapo.
I would agree. I think the millage to support the mental health services within the county is badly needed. And I think it's an area that's been truly underfunded, not just a matter of years, but decades since it's come. I think in terms of this resolution, I think the key is it says intent. It's what we would intend to use the money for. I think it can help shape the discussion with the County Board of Commissioners. It may change how they write their language based on how they want the millage actually to go, but we're stating an intent of how, if this came available based on what we know now, how we would like to be able to use the money. And I think in terms of, it's not budgeting, we're not budgeting anything right now. We're making general projections of how we'd like to use any refund that would come available. I think as Councilmember Ackerman clearly laid out, if we do have the vote, it is in November. It plays right into our budgeting process of how we can utilize the additional funds in developing the budget, how the city administrator and staff can look at it to try and obtain or to help fund things that are goals. I think our goals that we have had for a significant number of years. I think it's reality that no matter what, we're never going to have enough dollars. There's never going to be enough money to pay for everything we'd like to do, whether it's safety related, whether it's with affordability. And I think affordability goes just beyond housing. I think affordability within our community is going to be key, and within all communities going forward is going to be key in terms of having and maintaining some type of robust economy to make sure the workers, the people that live within our city can afford to live there, not only in terms of housing, but also food, utilities, and other things. But I think at the end of the day, I think this is an intent. I don't think it binds us. I think it opens a discussion. It lets the county at this time, or all the commissioners know, this is how we think we'd like to use the rebated money if we get it back at this time. and that could change. It may, again, shape how the county goes about crafting actual language for the millage, and then getting that information out to residents, and then allow residents to make, within the county, make their decisions of how and if they want to support this or not. So I will be supporting it because it is an intent. It's not binding us to anything at this time. I appreciate the concerns other council members have, but it's not binding. It presents an intent at this time and leaving it open for discussion later on. Thank you.
Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. Just wanted to respond to some of the remarks about process. This process, to me, in stating our intent to support our priorities should more funding become available, is a much stronger process than my least favorite part of the budgeting process, which is the budget amendment. Historically, this body has thrown sometimes millions of dollars on the fly at the very last minute with amendments that are brought up the day that we pass the budget. To me, that is a horrible process and one that I cringe at every time we go forward, which is why I rarely support budget amendments, unless they're brought up well in advance and can be vetted by this body. So to me, intending how we spend this money in line with our priorities makes perfect sense. And I would wager that there's likely a strong correlation, especially given the response that we've heard from the community today, between those that would support mental health services and those who would support additional funds for climate change, affordable housing, and pedestrian safety. As many council members have rightly pointed out, there is a lot of intersectionality between all of those priorities. So I think that what we're seeing is just something that's in line with our values. I also just want to point out just some misinformation that I'm repeatedly hearing, which I know is unrelated, so I apologize, but about the Greenbelt millage. The Greenbelt millage was meant to be a source of funding that was 1/3 to 2/3 over the course of the millage and not money that needs to be spent in that regard annually. So as I've stated before, and will continue to state, that I believe the Park Advisory Commission in not spending money willy-nilly, but in line with a process that was set up to rate and prioritize projects and understand that any land that's brought into the park system, that money is only for the purchase of said land and not for maintenance. So they do so judiciously and also with an eye to the future for projects like the Greenbelt, where said purchases may be desired and have been desired for a long time in this community.
Councilmember Kayasapathy.
Thank you. Yeah, I wish this millage was separated into mental health component and public safety. I have raised this issue. Many of you know that I have a young adult child who suffers from serious mental illness, and I'm very aware of the underfunding, and I would myself campaign for a millage for mental health services. But I think transparency and accountability is very important, to be honest, especially with generous taxpayers such as the Ann Arbor residents. And we have routinely seen, I mean, in election cycles, for example, how we were diverting water and sewer funds for public art. And there was a huge outcry from residents, and it was put for a vote on the ballot, and it was defeated. The public art millage was, and the AAATA expansion and increase in millage, I believe it was the same year, it was approved. So Ann Arbor residents have priorities, and they generously vote for millages that they support, and I really think it would be cleaner, it's clearer, and if there's one message that I would like to see, I would like to send to the county commission, listening to residents, is we need to be very upfront and clear with them. What money is being used for what? So I think it would be much cleaner to put a mental health millage and then vote on it, which I have no doubt will pass, and then separate out other issues and deal with the rebates and all that. Because I do see not only a correlation, but of course causation between dealing with mental illness and public security, like police issues and public safety issues. But in terms of funding, I think residents feel very leery when we repurpose millages, use from one to. So I think this would be, so that's where I stand, and I wish this was two different millages. Thank you.
Councilmember Long.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Katisopathy. I agree with what you just articulated. A couple of comments. I too am, I'm never really supportive of combined millages with different purposes, and I think the county should have two millages, one for mental health and one for public safety, and give the voters a choice on what they want. Then when you compound that, I should say, with the rebate provision for jurisdictions that have police departments already, the millage becomes very confusing. So then we have this added, transparency, education issues that we're not addressing. It's especially confusing for jurisdictions that have, again, police departments, and that's even if Ann Arbor we're going to use the money for public safety, which we're apparently not going to do. And into the whole budget process that we're bypassing here. I mean, we have an annual process with retreats, detailed work sessions with individual departments that's specifically designed to provide the necessary background to make informed, educated decisions on spending. The city administrator, by our charter, presents the budget, and then it is our job to take a deep dive in the budget, ask as many questions as possible, guilty, but to find money in the budget, if you want to find offsets, to adjust the priorities. And it was said, I believe, that these amendments then propose a reallocation of millions of dollars. I've never in all my years seen that happen. I mean, we can't find two nickels to rub together in the general fund budget, after all said and done. And, but we do take our deep dives and try to, again, fund the things that have been identified to us by our residents as priorities that need to be addressed. And for this approach that we're taking here to say, here are the priorities and here are the amounts, it ignores that process. And again, I think it's irresponsible. I mean, today, one of the emails I got, the individual, she sent it to all of us. This lady sent us 3 emails, I think. She said, one of her questions, what committee recommended this? I said there was no committee. How were the percentages determined? I said, who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. Again, there was no discussion about that, unlike our budget discussions and deliberations. And we're hearing from the departments and, hearing what their needs and priorities are. And those things are constantly evolving. Councilmember Westfall and I certainly have an appreciation for that, just sitting on the board, I know you're going to, Board of Insurance, where we see the small claims against the city for, it's all related to infrastructure needs that we have across the city. And it just heightens the appreciation for, where we're not investing our capital in ways that, these are very basic needs that we need to address. So it's just, it's just a reminder that needs evolve, priorities evolve, and without that input from our staff and our community, again, we're bypassing this in a way that to say this is how we want to spend this money for the next 10 years it doesn't do the process or our community justice, I don't think. Thank you.
Councilmember Warpahowski.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. A couple of items. You know, it's interesting. On the one hand, we're hearing people say that we should give clarity to the voters about exactly what they'll be voting on. And on the other hand, people are saying we should be waiting until our budget process after the millage takes place to actually weigh in what would happen with the millage. Can't have it both ways. We either have to get in front of this and say what our priorities are, or say to the voters, yeah, if they do this rebate thing, just trust us, we'll do good things with it for the next 10 years. We have to make a decision. There's, you know, I can see the arguments for both. I think we will have, to Councilmember Eaton's point about what is likely to succeed at the ballot box, if we're asking for money, if we're going to be getting this rebate, this unrestricted general fund rebate, giving clarity to the voters about what we'll be using for, I think that's going to help give them the security that they're going to want, rather than this blank check approach. Now, for those who think that we should always be clearly stating up front what we want the money for before we ask voters for tax dollars, then that logic says we should be eliminating our general fund, funding everything a la carte, and not having that ability to change. I don't think that's good policy. But having that general fund in place, as money's coming in, we have to make the case. What we've seen is voters want to know where it's coming, and this is a chance to let the voters know how we'd spend those monies if they come through. And this idea of having an intent millage and taking it seriously isn't new to us. Right? Every year when we're going through the budget process, the last step of the process is the Parks Fairness Millage. Because 10 years ago, when we passed our Parks Operating Fund millage, previous council made a promise to the voters that if you pass this, we're not going to use this as a slush fund to take money out of the parks to fund other general fund. And so we made that promise 10 years ago, and we've honored it. Just like the Land Acquisition Committee and the Parks Advisory Commission take seriously that 1/3, 2/3 split. And over the 30-year life in that case of the Greenbelt millage, they're looking at how do we allocate those funds over the term. We've used these intent millages in the past. We've taken them seriously. We've kept our word. And I think that's part of why we've been able to get the support for some of the millages when we've said, here's what we want to do with this money. There's been a lot of question about how the county's structured this millage, and I get it. If I were just to ask what is the millage I would want, I would write something differently. But you know what, I had a chance to sit down with one of our county commissioners, Conan Smith, as well as Commissioner LaBarre and Ricky Jefferson to talk about this a couple weeks ago. And one of the things Commissioner Smith said is that when he was county board chair, he saw the need for additional funding, and he tried to get a millage on the ballot, and he couldn't get it through the board. And following him, Yusuf Rabi saw the need. He tried to get it on the ballot, couldn't get it on the ballot. Commissioner Felicia Brayback, when she was board chair, she tried, and she couldn't get it on the ballot, trying to find that sweet spot that addresses the needs that urban communities like urban affluent communities like Ann Arbor see, urban communities that are facing other challenges like Ypsilanti face, rural communities, out county urban core, trying to get something that they're able to get 5 yes votes on the Board of Commissioners to. None of the previous board chairs, even though they've tried, has been able to do it. So I get this sense that this isn't ideally the favorite flavor of bologna, to use Caleb's verse earlier, that some of us might want, but I understand that Commissioner LaBarre has gone through a very difficult process of trying to figure out how do we balance these needs across the county to build the coalition. He will need to get it just on the ballot, and then, for my point, hopefully through yes vote in November. To that end, people have said we should be treating mental health as if it's unrelated to public safety. Look, one of the biggest mental health service providers in the county is the jail. One of the biggest substance abuse service providers in the county is the jail. One of the biggest entities that deals with homelessness is the jail, right? If we're going to talk about these issues of mental health and public safety, they are intricately linked. And what I really appreciate, and I would not be saying this about if we there are other sheriffs we've had where I wouldn't be trusting this millage. I'll just say it that way. But seeing the commitment that Sheriff Clayton, as well as the community mental health services in the county, say that we've got to be working together on these, because if we're able to have that integration between our mental health services and our public safety services, we're seeing it at the county. My hope is that if this passes, and there's some really interesting things that the Sheriff Clayton and others in the county have ideas for. We'll find ways to work with them to help make sure that we are integrating mental health services with our public safety services. These are linked. These are linked. So I'm hopeful that we will see this. We will honor our intent millage, our intent resolution with this, just like we have with our Parks Fairness, just like we are continue to do with our Greenbelt millage. We understand the ultimate link, the fundamental link between public safety and mental health, and that we will give the County Board of Commissioners our sense of, yes, we see the need in our community, and we support this effort. Now, some people have said, you know, it's another tax, or is it fair to give people another tax? Ultimately, it's up to the voters. It's up to the taxpayers. They get to decide should they move forward with this millage. So that's my rant. I have one quick thing, if I can log in here, if the clerk would pass the, forward the amendment to council. I would like to ask the council's indulgence to offer a small amendment to the second resolved clause. Currently, the resolved clause reads 40% to affect the goals of the Affordable Housing Needs Assessment, AKA Washtenaw County Housing Affordability and Economic Equity Analysis, and to increase workforce housing, operating and capital. I would like to add the phrase, with guidance by the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board. They are our on-the-ground board that's intimately connected with the specific needs and opportunities in these housing affordability areas. And I think giving them the chance to weigh in as we make out the specific plans on this is appropriate.
Is there a second?
Aye.
Councilmember Ackerman, is that friendly to the body?
And with that, I'd like to call the question, Your Honor.
We have one other person on the queue.
Fair enough.
Councilmember Westfall.
I'll pass, thanks.
I don't know, I want to treat this as a formal call to question, but is there further discussion? Then we'll see whether we need to do that. Roll call vote, please, starting with Councilmember Crapel.
On the resolution.
Pardon me, thank you. Is the resolution, on the resolution as amended?
Councilmember Crapel?
Yes.
Councilmember Warpahowski?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Kawasapati? No. Councilmember Frenzel?
Yes.
Councilmember Westphal?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
No.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
No.
Motion carries.
CA 12, resolution to approve a professional services agreement with Brush Design LLC for 11 public art on the Stadium Boulevard reconstruction project, South Main Street to Kippy Drive, in the amount of $100,000. Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Discussion, please, of CA 12. Councilmember Lum.
Thank you. I asked for this to be pulled out of the consent agenda because I will not be supporting this public art installation for the same 3 reasons I've mentioned throughout all of these debates on public taxpayer funding for public art and the old Percent for Art program. At the top of my list is that I don't support the diversion of funds from much-needed capital improvement projects. While the cost for this public art project is less than some of the others we've done, it's $135,000 for this one compared with several $100,000 for others. It is still a significant amount of money that we could otherwise use to fix roads, bridges, and sidewalks, replace aging water or sewer infrastructure, or make stormwater improvements. The mayor mentioned, quote, chronically underfunded needs, end quote, in reference to another agenda item tonight. And I'd suggest that replacing infrastructure is certainly one of them. I also don't believe diverting funds from capital projects to public art is the expectation taxpayers had when they approved the dedicated millage for streets and sidewalks a year ago, or when they pay their water, sewer, and stormwater bills, which continue to increase pretty significantly year after year. My second concern is the lack of private funding. If any community can fund a public art program privately, it would be Ann Arbor. And I continue to believe we've not pursued that opportunity nearly as aggressively as we could and should. Instead, we just default to taxpayer funding because it's easier. Finally, I also believe the structure we're using, linking public art installations to a specific underlying project, is not an effective way to implement a public art program. That was the structure of the Percent for Art program, and it's continuing here but I think tying art to specific infrastructure projects is contrived and limiting, and has resulted in costly art installations of debatable value. Supporters will say this $135,000 here isn't a lot of money or a large chunk of the stadium reconstruction project. Well, it all adds up. Over the last few years, we've diverted over $1.5 million in funds to public art projects here at City Hall, at the Justice Center, at the Stadium Bridge, and other locations. And for these reasons, I'll not be supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eaton.
I also will not be supporting this. I would note that there was a meeting between staff, residents of the city, and the Fourth Ward council members, where the residents sought an attractive wall, just a wall that blended with that area. They used as an example the brick walls around the stadium directly across the street. And at the time they were told, we can't afford to do it in an attractive manner. So we went ahead with a poured cement retaining wall, and now we're going to spend $135,000 to try to prettify that ugly wall. It doesn't make sense to do it in this fashion, especially when the residents who are most concerned about it had a better idea. I would also point out that in the materials that we've looked at, these triangular pieces of brushed aluminum always are shown in colors, blues and greens and such. In fact, they're all aluminum. There is no color tinting. This is supposed to represent the reflection of nature from around that. There isn't any nature around that. They cut down all the trees. There's a stadium across the street, and there's 5 lanes of traffic. This is going to be triangles of aluminum hanging off from a poured cement wall, and it's really not going to be the kind of art that we should be seeking if we're going to spend this kind of money. So for all of those reasons, I can't support this expenditure.
Further discussion? Councilmember Grant.
Thank you. To me, it doesn't make sense after we, as a body, agreed on a process to select an artist and hired a local organization to find said artist, and when they come forward after going through with a community process that we all approved, to then say, no, thank you. It also, I continue to be troubled with this expectation that the Art Commission, which is made up of private citizen volunteers, be the ones to figure out how to privately fund art. Perhaps if we had a stronger focus on economic development in the city, that might be something that might be more appropriate, someone with those skills. But I think that is a big ask of our citizen volunteers. And speaking of process, there was a process that this body agreed to, which was to bake in public art where appropriate. Where it's highly visible. One of the lessons I think was learned very strongly in the past Percent for Art program was that every time we had a project, it was related to stormwater, and therefore all the art projects had to be related to water in some way, and we all know how that went, for better or worse. So, so this to me, where we can select art where it's highly visible, where there can be a public process, and where it makes sense for a project. That's the process that this body has supported in the past, and that's why I'll be supporting this evening.
Further discussion? Councilmember Smith.
I would echo Councilmember Grand's comments, as we did go through a process to do this, and I think I understand the perspective to not want to fund any public art in our public projects. People have that point of view. I don't happen to agree with it. But we set this process up a long time ago, and to simply say we're not going to follow through on it because, we've suddenly become art critics and know what's good and what's bad, I think is disrespectful to the amount of time and energy that was spent by the art commission, by staff, by the artists who contributed different designs for consideration, the public that voted on these things. So I'm going to support it. I'm happy to support it. I'm glad that we have more than just a brick wall there.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eaton.
I'm sorry, I just want to make one more point. During this process that we're speaking of, the public was given the opportunity to vote on the various art projects. But they were not given the opportunity to express none of the above as a choice. And I really hope that in the future, when we're trying to select public art, that that's one of the choices. I'm not against all art. I really believe that we should try to bake in art where appropriate. But sometimes a wall should just be a wall. And this project has art that's been represented as something other than what it's actually going to look like. And it was chosen in a process that didn't allow residents to say that they didn't want any of the choices that were being presented to them.
Further discussion? Councilmember Westfall.
I just want to point out it's been demonstrated that art in itself has economic development value. And I think of all things we can all agree on is that we have many underfunded needs. And, you know, if there are creative ways of better funding our infrastructure, I am open to that. It either has to be more money or saving money on something else. I think 100,000 is not going to fix our roads, but I think it is an efficient way to make capital projects more attractive.
Further discussion? Councilmember Frenzel.
I would I'd echo a little bit of what Councilmember Westfall brought up. I think it's important to recognize that placemaking is critical to all sections of town, especially blank walls, because blank walls end up getting painted or artified in one way or another eventually. And placemaking is one of the things that drives us to love our city, the intersections that we're at. The specific places next to the river, or the alley that otherwise could be seen as just a refuse dump. And these are the benefits that art give us routinely, and I think that we need to promote them specifically and generally. I do agree that there's some concern about how we bake in art into the design process and the implementation process of projects, but I would lean the opposite direction and say we should integrate the design and implementation more than less. I think that we've come into this conundrum after the fact on a few occasions, and I'd rather see us have it more up front and have the construction done, and then have the residents not have to worry about another contractor coming in to do the installation after the fact.
Further discussion? Roll call vote, please. Starting with Councilmember Crapel.
Councilmember Crapel?
Yes.
Councilmember Worbowski?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Kalasapati?
No.
Councilmember Frenzel?
Yes.
Councilmember Westfall?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
No.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Mayor Taylor?
Yes.
Councilmember Eaton?
No.
Motion carries.
Council members and the public will forgive me. I had called for DS1 prior to DB1 and DB2. So those of you in the House waiting for those two resolutions, my apologies, and council members too. I was just so excited to get to that conversation. DB1, resolution to approve 904 South Main Site Plan, 904 South Main Street. Moved by Councilmember Smith, second by Councilmember Crapel. Discussion, please, of DB1. All in favor?
Aye.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to support this, but I just have to say, I don't know. There's some things about this that just don't feel great. I mean, they're meeting all the requirements here, but, you know, and I recognize that no stormwater detention is required. But why? The site's 4,850 square feet, and if it were 5,000, they'd have to do that. And also, again, meeting the standards, the single-family home that's going to be demolished, you know, it's an old house, just outside the historic district, so it's okay. Again, it's, I'll be supporting this, but, you know, it just doesn't feel great.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. DB2, resolution to approve the DeBuck annexation, .59 acres, north side of Devonshire Road, east of Heather Way. Moved by?
Second ward.
Thank you, Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion, please, at DB2. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. Cycling back to, I believe, its proper place, CA5.
DB2,
DB3. Goodness gracious.
You really don't like these
No, I
DBs.
don't.
Is this guy new?
I was out of town this morning. DB3, resolution to approve the Braun Park annexation, 10.44 acres, west side of Charles Drive, south of Huron River Drive. Moved by Councilmember Lum, seconded by Councilmember Westfall. Discussion of DB3. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. Am I safe to go to CA5?
I think,
All
yeah,
right.
you are.
Excellent, thank you. CA5, resolution to approve amendment number 1 to the professional services agreement with Hilliard Heinz in an amount not to exceed $230,000 and appropriate $30,000 in additional funds. Moved by Councilmember Westfall and seconded by Councilmember Togasapati. Discussion, please, of CA5. Councilmember Westfall.
Is there somebody here who can answer a couple of questions on this change?
I can do that.
That's left to you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Last man standing.
And I appreciated some clarification on this. I asked through caucus questions. You know, I didn't bring this up at the time. This is a very necessary process. It's something that's the community and commissions have worked hard on bringing forward and scoping. You know, this was approved unanimously, I believe, despite the fact that there was a $50,000 placeholder for this process that ended up being $200,000. I do not have clarity on, I see the additional scope of work that's been proposed, which constitutes the additional $30,000 on top of the $200,000. I am not clear as to why that scope was included in the original proposal, and I guess we could start there.
The additional effort that's contained in this resolution and contract modification resulted from the outreach and the discussions that were done in the initial scope of work. Particularly, both Hilliard Heinz and Police Department realize that they have some work to do to integrate community service as a way, community relations as part of how they do work. I think right now, to be fair, you know, the Police Department, they are under a lot of different pressures. So what this comes to is a path to not only provide training to the police to interact and to be more engaged with the community, but also to find ways for the community to be more engaged with the police department. So it's a level of detail that wasn't really anticipated in the first aspect. The original contract really was to address and gather information from different stakeholders around town to get their feelings and to develop a couple of recommendations. One was whether or not there's need for a Citizens Advisory Board. That recommendation will be in the report that comes forward. There was a look into the police department to see what their strengths and weaknesses were. That'll be contained in the report as well. But the next step, which is to really provide some facilitation on moving from the report into making those recommendations come alive, is what this is all about.
Okay, I guess my hesitation comes from, I mean, the themes that are, proposed to go into a little bit more in depth with this additional money seem to be ones that have been echoed through the community for several years. I have trouble when a large contract like this comes back with an additional ask that seems to have been part of the original request. And I'll note now, something that I am, at least one constituent has highlighted to me, is that the survey contained an error in it, and it gives me pause about the process and some feedback that we received from the in-person community meeting that they've had. So my inclination would be to think more about what we are getting here, and see if this money can be sourced from the existing contract. I'd be interested in any colleagues' input.
Councilman Kalasapathy.
I have some questions too regarding this, and so if I understand your explanation, what has happened is, as a result of this initial data gathering and reaching out to community stakeholders, Hillard Hines has realized that there is a gap in police training regarding community relations, and they are going to take on the training aspect of it. Am I right?
I believe the scope of the amendment is clearly laid out in the proposal that Hillard Hines provided us under Phase 2.1, which has 5 bullet points that do address a series of one-on-one interviews with the Ann Arbor Police Department command staff, particularly talking about how they'll interact with the Citizens Advisory Board, provide a one-day training and brainstorming session to the chief and command staff to develop strategies, to develop a draft proposal for the community engagement program, to then to finalize that proposal, and then develop the appropriate public-facing documents. Those are items that I believe are beyond the initial scope. Those are items that will help us take the step forward from what will amount to a well-thought-out and well-reasoned report into implementation.
Yeah, it just seems that this is beyond the initial scope of whatever terminology you might want to use, but the initial one that came out of the Human Rights Commission was a civilian oversight board that comes out to have, so this seems to be, I mean, I would have been more comfortable if there was a gap in our police training and there was an RFP going out and we get a competitive bid to do this training. So I don't know. I was surprised because this didn't come to the Human Rights Commission or anything like that. And when I saw this on Legistar, I share some of the concerns council members have raised here at the table and outside regarding this additional, because this just seems to be a bit, I mean, this is where usually we get an RFP consultant, I mean, they bid and consultants come in and do the training. I mean, I'm sure there are other gaps that have been noticed, and I'm sure the report, the final report will reflect. And I think it's at that point that council is going to look at that report and say, okay, these are the gaps and what is the funding available? What are our priorities of this? I mean, yeah, I'm not quite sure on this. I mean, I know I've been gung-ho about this whole police oversight and getting an independent auditor, doing the study. I mean, this is all what we should be doing. But unless I'm understanding this wrong, to my understanding, this just seems to be outside the scope, so.
If I could,
I would-
if I could address those.
Yeah, thank you.
First, the scope of services initially talked about examining the role of a citizen board without specifying what its structure was, and the structure and authorities would come out of the process. So I think it's not quite correct to say that there was supposed to be an oversight board that was part of the effort. I think when we talked to members of the HRC who participated in the selection, I think we were all of the understanding that we weren't going to prejudge the outcome. The second point that I'd like to make is Hillard Hines was selected through a request for proposal, not through an invitation for bid. And that's because we were looking for qualifications of staff and experience, and then the price was negotiated based upon the qualifications. That's essentially the path we take for all of our professional services agreement, so that while cost is important, the method and the personnel involved and the corporate qualifications are important as well. The reason I asked them for this proposal was also to not lose the momentum, not lose the relationships that were formed during the process. This process with Hillard Hines facilitation helped bridge a gap in trust between the community and the police department. I think they've been successful in doing that, albeit it's been something of a rocky road at times, and there have been some struggles with reaching deeply into the community, which they have offered additional help on to get us there. So the end result of this, it's kind of a bridge from a report to implementation so that we can engage what I think even this evening council has said is a very exceptional police department to make the next step to go into setting the right tone and to be wholly engaged with the community.
Further discussion? Councilmember Crapel.
I'm going to support this because I think it's important. I think this next step, I think what we're looking for and what we want from the results of the study and going forward is something that sets the example for the entire nation, a new and different approach. Oversight boards are retrospective looking. They look backwards. They tend to be punitive in nature, and they don't tend to have the full engagement and support of all the parties involved. And I think a critical part of moving forward and what we see in many of the troubles we have in a number of communities is there's not the communication, the engagement, the understanding between the different elements of the community, between the police and other public service agencies and the different communities they serve within a city like Ann Arbor. And that's one of the biggest things I think we need to do is break down those barriers of communication and get where we can have open and honest communication and a mutual understanding and respect developed between all parts of our community and the police department, so there's an understanding. And I think the community engagement part is going to be a key part of that. I think we have to be prospective looking. How do we prevent people from having problems? How do we prevent these things? We talked about mental health. How do we prevent someone with mental health problems from being put in a position where they have to deal with the police as the last resort? Often those people, police officers may have received some training, but they're not professionals in mental health. How do we prevent someone, a young man or a young woman from going down a path they shouldn't be going, or get caught in a situation late at night where a quick decision's made that potentially has a traumatic outcome that doesn't have to happen if there's based on a reaction from one party or the other. How do we improve the communication so parties understand how to communicate, how to talk, and we bridge those gaps of fear and suspicion, that we don't have those, that you feel you can trust your public officials, and there's that mutual respect that goes on. So I think this is a natural outcome of the work that's been done, and it's that necessary bridge we have to have as we want to move forward. Because I agree with Mr. Lazarus. My understanding was that there were no decisions made as to, or a predetermination of what the outcome of this was going to be, what this organization or group is going to be, but it was going to, we're going to try to drive and find something that's going to be new and innovative, that can set the example for all communities in the nation. Thank you.
Councilmember for the Westfall.
Thank you. To my understanding, this survey is still open, is that correct? The deadline was extended?
The period for the survey has been extended, that's correct.
Is it possible that the scope might expand depending on the kind of results we get back from the survey?
You know, I think, just as a general comment, we've done this on some other consultant reports. There comes a point in time where we have to own the results and then implement it. And you know, one example of that was on the organizational strategic plan. There's a point in time where, you know, you take the results from what the consultant provides, and then you take ownership, you implement it, and I think that's where we are. Once we get through this structure of setting up the go-forward plan, I think we just need to own it and then institutionalize it. So I don't intend on bringing anything back again to council.
Thank you for that. I mean, I really have no qualms about the services that they're proposing to provide for this additional sum. It's really that there's already been quite a change from what was originally anticipated to the contract, and the additional scope hasn't been vetted through the Human Rights Commission. It is persuasive to me that it would make sense for this consultant, if it's determined that they're doing good work, that they leverage the existing relationships they have with staff in the community and other commissions to carry this additional work forward. It's just that...
If I could just interject, though,
Sure.
because I want to address the notion that we have not been in contact with the Human Rights Commission. Hillard Hines has been back before them. Ms. Kirby, who's the project lead, has had frequent conversations with Ms. Staumbaugh, as I have, along with other members of the HRC, and I've been before the HRC as well to discuss this. There have been challenges, there have been differences in expectations, but there has been exceptional communication, and we've gone back and redone things because members of the HRC and other members of the community felt that we haven't done appropriate outreach. And to Hillard Hines' credit, they have scheduled additional sessions, and they are reaching back to members of, those members of the community have said we haven't appropriately reached out to try and find ways to do that and to ask for input in that regard as well. So the fact that there have been some prickly points along the way, I think, underscore the fact that this has been an open process and not one that has had a preconceived outcome. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, that's okay. I'll just wrap up by hoping that, you know, the results of the survey are, you know, exceed our expectations for what kind of respondent populations we get. And my hope is that, you know, according to how much money they have left in their appropriation, that, you know, there is some left over to address unanticipated additional meetings or efforts that it sounds like they have been doing along the way, which is good to hear. But I'm persuaded that this is, if the scope is necessary, that they're the right vendor for it.
Further discussion? Councilmember Eaton.
I'll be supporting this. I think that this is a natural extension of the work that this same group has been doing. At times, I've been rather disappointed in their ability to reach into minority communities to really get good information about people who may in fact have a legitimate complaint about our police. But this particular resolution doesn't go to bed. It goes to a natural extension of the work that they're doing, and I think that this is worthwhile, and I'll be supporting it.
Further discussion? Councilor Karlasopathy.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Yes, Hilliard Hines has appeared before the Human Rights Commission, but this extension of work was never discussed or brought to the Human Rights Commission. Just want to clarify that. And the Human Rights Commission has been a watchdog on this whole issue, and they have raised several serious concerns with the consultants regarding, especially reaching out to minorities. I mean, some of us council members have been at both the public outreach, and it was very evident that I mean, I'll be point blank. I mean, one person actually stood up and spoke about this, and he said, like, the most contentious issue regarding policing at a national level is the relationship between the police force and young African-American men. And when you don't see a single African-American man talking about this issue, and I mean, I'm not trying to be antagonistic. I mean, my comment was, I mean, white liberalism can take you to a certain point, but it's necessary, but it's not sufficient if you want real results, if you want to talk about real discussion. So I sincerely share the concerns you have, council member, and I do hope that they take this seriously to reach out to, and Human Rights Commission has been giving really constructive help in terms of which groups they should be going to, where they should be going to, and reaching out so that the report that comes out is not, I mean, it's kind of a white liberals, what they want this city to be, which is great values. I'm not putting that down, but that in itself is not enough, because when people tell you they were followed by the police when they went into the neighborhood, and they were not stopped, but they were followed because they were driving a nice car. I mean, these are the things that are coming up. And a white African-American professor, when he was arrested, and the comments that he had to listen to. These are all serious, problematic issues. And Mr. Lazarus, maybe I understood you wrong, but I do want to make one correction. It was not about prejudging the outcome, but it was very clear, at least what came out of the Human Rights Commission was not whether we need an oversight board or not. That was not the question that was asked of the Hilliard Hines. It was more what kinds of oversight board was one of the issues. What kind of an oversight board do we want in Ann Arbor? And all the other relationships that community policing and all the other aspects of it. So it was never an issue that we have the greatest police force, so we don't need an oversight board. That was very clear, because their basic assumption was police cannot police themselves, because this is a democracy. We do believe in checks and balances, and it is about checks and balances. So I have gone through this process from day one through the Human Rights Commission, and I think it is my duty at this point, if there is any sort of confusion that what the initial intent was when the Human Rights Commission brought their report to the City Council and asked us for an independent audit. So just want to make sure. Thank you.
The RFP was developed by a group of stakeholders that included members of the HRC and people who were identified by the HRC. So the actual procurement was very much inclusive. The members of that group were involved in scoring and evaluating the proposals. That was a diverse group. I've been to at the listening sessions. I found the session I was at to have a diverse audience, to include young African-American men that were there. We have listened to the concerns about trying to reach more deeply into the community, and Hilliard Hines and Ms. Kirby, in my discussions with her, has been open to changing the methods and will continue to do that. The process has been inclusive. It's generated goodwill and trust, and as we get closer to the end, my commitment is not to do anything that violates that trust and inclusiveness that has characterized the process, nor is there any going to be any filter applied to what we get out of the report. It will be a report that clearly identifies what they've seen with how the police department engages, and it will also have the recommendations, as I said, on the scope and role of whatever advisory or citizen group comes out of it.
Councilmember Frenzel.
A little bit of echoing of some of the comments of frustration or concern about, I mean, it's always going to be very challenging, this particular conversation, especially bringing in a third party from outside of town to reach a minority sets of community members in a divisive conversation. And my contacts in the community that represent those, some of those peoples are certainly grappling with that frustration themselves. That said, I have found the contractor to be direct and specific in responding to those and to coming to the table when I brought other individuals from our community to light to them. To that end, I presume that all of us did receive information from Ms. Kirby and the consultant extending the survey and their interaction just a week or so ago. I would implore you all to draw that to the attention of all of those in the community that you have contact with that aren't white and middle class and middle-aged for that matter. And I also want to be very, very careful at this juncture that we don't set forward any intent or language that starts to erode the ultimate usefulness of the product that we get from the consultant. I think we can certainly look at the concerns that we have about how this process can inherently go, and then as we move forward into phase 2 and phase 3 of some sort of implementation into the future, we're careful about some of the shortcomings of how the process may have happened, but I don't think that now is the right time to do that.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? It is approved. Do we have communications today from the city attorney?
No, we do not.
Thank you. We have before us the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals, moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Grand. A discussion of the clerk's report. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The clerk's report is approved. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, you need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may have only one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance in speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it to you. Is there anyone who would like to speak today at public comment?
Good evening, Mayor Taylor, council members. My name is Jared Hoffert, and I'm a resident of Ward 2. I come to you tonight with members of my family and neighborhood in Ward 2 community to address a pressing traffic problem in the Orchard Hills Maplewood subdivision, requiring proactive solution to ensure safety and health of our community. Specifically near the intersection of Yellowstone Drive and Blewett Road, there is an approximately 90-degree blind curve. There have been multiple incidents at this site, including crashes, side-swiped cars, trees being taken out when cars have jumped the curb. This issue is exacerbated by 2 factors. First, the road construction projects currently happening at Plymouth and Green Roads and the Nixon Road roundabout installation. While there's no doubt to the inherent need of these projects, the result is more traffic diverting through our subdivision and avoiding the backups. This includes the rerouting of AAA-TA buses through the neighborhood. Second is the complete lack of any signage through the whole of Blewett Road showing speed limit, curve ahead, or anything of that nature. I have pictures of homemade signs that my neighbor has made, and that's the only signage out there to remind drivers to be responsible with their speed and aware of this particularly dangerous curve. We all assume that people know that 25 miles per hour is the speed limit in residential areas. However, I and my neighbors have witnessed people driving at excessive speeds around this bend, and in some cases barely missing parked cars or head-on collisions with cars coming in the other direction. I have personally seen AAATA buses speeding around the bend only to have the drivers grin at me as I stare at them in disbelief. This neighborhood, like much of Ward 2, is full of families with children who are enjoying their outdoor playtime, and in this particular corner is no exception. While it would be easy to just lay this off to the current road construction projects, the truth of it has been this is ongoing, year-round. Especially important to note is the presence of 2 schools, Thurston Elementary and Clegg Middle School, in the subdivision that are affected by these traffic conditions. There seems to be no monitoring of the traffic flow now or at any time of year. Please know that we are filling out the traffic calming petitions, and neighbors have filled out multiple traffic surveys, called the police and AAATA to complain about this situation. But other than the thank you for your email notes from the survey or one appearance by a AAATA official, nothing of true substance has happened. We are here tonight to ask for a quick action in addressing this problem, specifically installing official signage posting the speed limit at proper intervals along Blewett Road, and more importantly, a decrease of speed sign around that particular bend. We would also ask for radar-based speed signs to be installed on Blewett Road on either side of that bend. The issue is immediate, and we cannot wait until another incident occurs to remediate the situation. We respectively ask Council to take action to help alleviate the problems quickly. Thank you, and have a safe and happy 4th of July.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak at public comment? Seeing no one, public comment is closed. Do we have communications from council? Do you have a closed session today?
No.
May I have a motion, please, to adjourn? Moved by Councilmember Smith, seconded by Councilmember Crapo. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.